Hey gang, Joshua Bacarella here with Sportsmen's Direct. We're going to change it up a little bit and do a quick video on live bait rigging techniques. You guys come into the shop all the time, and I take for granted that you know all these different little tricks or different ways to hook different baits onto the hook. And so I just thought I'd take a few minutes here and explain a few of those things that I take for granted when I'm out there. Next wet bait we're going to talk about is probably the one that you guys are most familiar with, and that's minnows. And yes, there is more than one way to hook a minnow. There are actually a multitude of ways to hook and rig a minnow, and I'm going to show you a couple of those right now. I'm going to get a couple of candidates up here. So I'm going to change hooks on you here real quick. And that tungsten jig I had, that was what I would call a horizontal jig. Okay, it's gonna lay horizontal to the earth, and we're gonna switch over and go to a vertical type jig really quick here. So, and this is just a generic, you know, lead jig, vertical style, meaning it's gonna hang up and down as opposed to horizontal. And we're gonna start out hooking our minnows with that guy first. I'm gonna grab a little customer here. Got some wet hands, and we're going to try to do this without having them escape. And I would think that most of you out there, this is probably going to be the most common way that you're going to rig a minnow, and that is lightly hook them in the back as lightly as you can. And I like to do it right in front of the dorsal fin. Okay, and for me, the reason I hook them in front of the dorsal fin is I'm trying to get close to the head, because again, most of the time fish are going to come in, are going to take them head first, and so that gives you the, if you hook them too far in the back, you have to wait too long to set the hook. If they don't take the bait in all the way, they can run around with it and not have the hook in their mouth. So if you hook them all the way forward like that, it's more likely that that hook's going to go in as soon as that fish takes the bait. So that is the hooking just in front of the dorsal fin technique. We're going to take this guy now, and I'm going to pop that hook out, and I'm going to show you probably the second most common way. And this next way, you don't necessarily have to have this horizontal or this vertical type jig. This next way you can do it with vertical or horizontal. So this next technique is real simple, and that is hooking them through the lips. This will also keep your bait alive a long time. Now, if I'm going to hook them through the lips and I'm going to use this vertical type jig, I'm going to be fishing it actively. I'm generally going to be fishing it up and down with a steady jigging motion. I'm not going to dead stick him like this. If I'm going to dead stick him most of the time with a vertical bait like this, or if I'm going to dead stick a minnow, I'm not going to use a vertical one like this. I'm going to use a horizontal jig of some sort. Like, I'm going to throw a kind of an old classic out here to my friend Dave Gens. This is a Gens bug, or Gens worm, I guess. I guess it's a Gens worm. So that's just through the lips with a horizontal bait. I could have done it with the tungsten jig, although generally for minnows I'm going to use a little bigger hook gap than what I would find on most tungsten jigs. Other than like our 6 mil that we make, we put an oversized hook on that 6 mil epoxy pro, and that works out really good for minnows. The next technique is going to be again with this horizontal. And this is a little bit on the small side for the hook on this guy, but we call this a skull hook technique. And this one is really not live bait, because we are going to hook that minnow right up through the skull. Now, the advantage to hooking them through the skull is that he can't get ripped off. I mean, unless you get something that's going to come up and rip that minnow and cut the minnow off of the jig, he's not going anywhere. So When you get those days that the fish are really hammering minnows and they really want minnows, but you're losing minnows to fish because they're plucking them off, whether you're hooking them in the back or you're hooking them in the lips, those fish really don't care if that minnow's alive, and neither should you. So take them and just hook them right through the mouth and right up through the skull. That's going to give you the strongest connection to that bait fish that you can get and the most natural presentation. This isn't just for panfish. Same thing for walleye, lake trout, northern pike, if you want to skull hook a smelt. I mean, it doesn't matter, but when those fish are actively feeding and you want to make sure that that bait stays on there, that's when you use the skull hook technique. Now, if we're talking bigger baits like walleye baits and you're talking bigger shiners, you can also skull hook them and then add a stinger hook on top of that and put that stinger further back. So that's just another technique for live bait. That's the skull hooking technique. And again, that's going to be on your horizontal presentation, generally with a big enough hook gap that you're going to have enough hook sticking up out of that bait fish so that you can set the hook on the fish, you know, and effectively impale him. Let's see. I'm going to get another lively candidate here, maybe a littler guy. Now this next technique you can do with just a single hook, or you can do with, I would prefer to use something relatively lightweight, because kind of the idea here is we're going to tail hook this guy. This is probably my least favorite way to hook live bait, because it's not super easy necessarily to get it through without sticking yourself in the finger. But by tail hooking them, you're allowing that bait fish to really struggle. He's going to stay alive, he's going to kick, he's going to take off, he's going to dart, especially on a single hook rig, maybe with a split shot up above him, and he's going to constantly dart and dart and dart and dart. And if the fish are really turned off, sometimes it's not the best way, because they might get tired of trying to chase if they're looking for an easy meal. But there's other times when tail hooking works really well. And like I said, you don't need to have a hook with any amount of weight on it whatsoever. There's another, this is kind of an unusual technique here. It's along the lines of having that fish struggle and try to take off. This is called a drop gap jig. Very similar to like a wacky hook as far as the shape and orientation. And this one isn't as much a rigging technique as it is just an overall presentation. But if the fish are really turned off, we'll take this jig and literally drop it down to the bottom. Let the jig itself anchor the minnow to the bottom, and then that minnow is just going to kick and pull and kick and pull, and he's going to try to get away, but he's going to be on that hook, and to the fish maybe he looks like he's bottom feeding or something or struggling, but the reality is that minnow is, you know, he's trying to get away from that hook. He's trying to move. He might drag that jig around a little bit on the bottom, which just adds more to the overall presentation. But this is a drop gap jig, and like I said, you could use the similar philosophy by using any relatively heavy jig and anchoring them down to the bottom to try to escape, basically. Hey, if you like this video content and you want to get updated as soon as the next video is out there, hit that subscribe button and a little bell icon, and you'll get notified as soon as the next video is up.